Hey, good evening to you guys. How's everybody doing? Welcome to Wednesday without Kyle. He could not make it tonight due to COVID, but there's a qualifier for that. Um, if you missed our discussion last week, once again, there have been a few cases reported in his state in Australia. He's not one of them. His kids aren't one of them. His wife's not one of them. But the whole state's gone back into like max lockdown. Um, Fines and arrest if you go more than 5 kilometers, which is like 3.25 miles away from your house. Businesses have to be shuttered, all that sort of thing. So yeah, he's kind of having a homeschool now, take care of the kids. So Kyle, if you're listening in, hello, we miss you. It's good to see you. Um, if you're over on Facebook and you're wondering where the video is, or if you've come here from Facebook because the video didn't start, Facebook's being jank right now and thinks I'm trying to stream to it directly rather than use OBS. It's like, oh no, you've selected direct streaming, so we're not. Yeah, no, you can't change to use a stream key. And I'm like, I, I don't care. Please let me stream to people on Facebook. Uh, but apparently they're just flipping me the middle finger. So I don't know what's going on with the Facebook stream and why I can't use that. Um, so yeah, that's what's happening right now with Facebook streaming. Let's see. So I'm just gonna minimize it. If you're over on Facebook, or if you've come here from Facebook, just just stay here for now, I guess. And speaking of health updates, for those of you friends of mine out there watching the live stream who maybe aren't on Facebook and you didn't catch up, or if you just don't know, one of my friends is a gentleman by the name of Tracy Lesh. Tracy is a pioneer of original Dungeons and Dragons. He co-created Tomb of Horrors, namely the artwork for it, for Gary Gygax. He made this, yes, this lovely painting back here. There we go. Uh, which is a unreleased piece of art intended for Dungeons and Dragons. Um, has got a body of work that includes novels, other role playing games than D&D and so on. Tracy has pneumonia and a blood infection, and they're dealing with cancer. He has not been able to attend our weekly streamed D&D event. I miss him greatly, D&D aside. So please, if you're so inclined, send your thoughts and prayers out there. And send your well wishes to Shelby Lesh on Facebook. I'm sure she would appreciate it. Tracy's a swell guy. Of a lot of the people who were there back in the day, a lot of them are not super folks. If you encounter some of these people, sometimes they can come off as a little abrasive, argumentative, and so on. Um, I've been lucky that I've picked the people that I like to talk to, like Jim Ward and Al Hammock and um, gosh, who else? Darlene, the artist, and of course Tracy, all wonderful people. And well, I think that says it. Tracy falls into the category of being a wonderful person. So, I hope Tracy gets better soon, and not just so he can come and play D&D with us again, but so he can be well and share his talents with the world. Anyway, it's been kind of a busy day today. Once Kyle let me know last night that he couldn't do the live stream, I thought about just doing a midday live stream, but I got the little ringy thing going. There we go. Okay. Anyway, so yeah, we had her graduation lunch today, and I had to go and pick that up because we didn't want to sit in a restaurant because my oldest is also not vaccinated yet. So that was around lunchtime. That was around the time when I would usually stream. But we also went to the school and picked up her diploma. So it was just really busy. And then this afternoon things just kept being busy and kept getting in the way. So I said, hey, I'll do the live stream around the time that I usually do the live stream. So thanks for coming out. Thanks for hanging out. Tomorrow, of course, I will be doing more painting, if that's what you guys want to see. If people don't want to watch me paint, then please say so. Just hop in the bleep bloop there and say no thanks for painting. Don't want to see it. But it's my hope that you guys enjoy that, and that's what I'll be doing, barring anyone else's suggestions. Friday, we're going to launch another deep dive into AD&D-ness. We are going to explore alignment on Friday. We're going to look at alignment as it is described in two different places. There are alignment descriptions in the Dungeon Master's Guide, and there are alignment descriptions in the Player's Handbook. They don't contradict each other. I know a lot of people will say, well, I read this in the Player's Handbook, and then the Dungeon Master's Guide seems to say something completely different. These actually mesh quite well. So, yeah, I'm looking forward to having a discussion on Friday, and if it bleeds over into the following week, into Monday, then so be it. We'll talk about it on Monday. But as I said, today was a bit of a busy day, and it didn't leave me a huge amount of prep time. Been working on a lot of computers. I've got I upgraded my daughter's 2nd gen i7 to a 4th gen i5, which is kind of a lateral move, but it leaves her a little bit more upgrade room, a little bit more headroom as far as upgradability in terms of memory and video cards, PCIe Gen 3. And plus it's a smaller, more compact, less power hungry CPU. So I think better performance overall. So now I got to say, her i7, put it into a spare system, the former studio streaming box, take that motherboard, put it back in the home theater PC that my daughter's current motherboard came out of. It's a big circle of computer swappingness. So I've got the former streaming PC is sitting over there. Her PC is sitting down here waiting for me to give it a little bit more TLC, because Windows is of course, so much fun when you swap motherboards. It used to be pretty awful. I'll tell you what, back in the days of... I had a very mixed bag with Windows, with DOS-based Windows 95, 98 2nd edition. Never really put my hands on Windows ME much at all. as far as old motherboard out, new motherboard in, and how the system would act. Um, and I was amazed the first time I did it and it worked. And then the second time I was like, that seems about right, when it didn't work. Um, and then with Windows 2000 and Windows XP, I never trusted it to do motherboard swaps. Didn't really fart around with Windows Vista enough to know what it would do. I just know that the UAC, user access control, was so locked down it probably would have had a full thrombo. Windows 7 had a tool whereby you could basically put Windows 7 into a I'm in a generic mode now and I'm just ready to install and run just like I've been the first time. And I used that method a couple times, but then other times I just swapped in new motherboards and processors and it just worked. Windows 8 didn't really mess with enough. Windows 10, yeah, I found Windows 10 hardware swaps to literally just be a case of unplug hard drive, plug new hard drive in, wait 10 or 15 minutes for it to pull in drivers, done. No big deal. So, that is the case with her machine. I new motherboard in, Windows 7 was like, yeah, okay, no problem. And then I installed all the upgrades and whatnot. But she'll be happier with that system, I think. Been doing some reading lately. Lots of reading. I started, finally, I had promised myself I was going to track down a physical copy of the book, but just the same, I found online, and not in an illicit way, it's free, it's available, The King of Elfland's Daughter by Lord Dunzani, which is a very, very cool fantasy book. It's both light and heavy. The prose is a little on the heavy side, but plot-wise, it's fairly breezy. But it's one of those Appendix N books that I had always intended to go back and read, and I'm thoroughly enjoying the heck out of it. Basically, a kingdom decides, hey, we're tired of being mundane. We wish we had a magical kingdom. And the king tells his son, hey, go to Elfland, find a bride, bring her back, and marry her, and we'll have a magical kingdom. So before he goes, he has a sword crafted for him made out of meteoric iron, and it's an intelligent weapon. Now, it's not an intelligent weapon like, your typical D&D sword that thinks or speaks at its owner, but it's implied that it has a likeness, a kinship to him, and he can feel it. He can like feel the sword's mood. And it has runes inscribed down the blade, and he has a scabbard made for it. And as soon as he enters Elfland, he is attacked by trees, by trees and vines that seek to ensnare him. And I wonder if Tolkien got his idea for Old Man Willow from The Lord of the Rings, and the Ents in general from these trees. But he finds that when he hacks them with his magic sword, they are quiesced. They go completely still. So he finds the King of Elfland's daughter and fights these knights that the King of Elfland had appointed to tend to her, and leaves. Well, in the course of the afternoon that he does this, oh, the King of Elfland also prepares to cast a spell. The King of Elfland has three spells, or runes, as Dunzani described them, and they can only be cast once ever. Um, and he prepares to cast a rune that will pull her back. And it's implied but never stated, do something terrible to him in the process. But they just make it out of Elfland as the rune is being pronounced. But in the course of the afternoon, he's gone, like 10 years go by. So there's some time dilation going on. And his father has died, but everybody's happy now that he's got this beautiful woman, this beautiful elfin maiden. And soon she has a child, and everyone seems to be happy, but she has a problem adjusting to Christdom, as Dunzani refers it to it. And when her husband admonishes her to not worship the stars and stones and items of nature, but rather the Christian relics that the friar, as Dunzani spells it, the friar asks her to venerate. She kind of tries to worship in the way of Christians, but she takes like stones that she likes, pretty stones, and goes to a reflecting pool and sets them around and looks at the stars and the reflection in the reflected there in the pool, and thinks to herself, okay, I'll pray to these things to remind me to pray to the articles. I will pretend that these are, a blessed cup, a baptismal urn, and so on. And her husband finds her, and he's vexed, and he's like, woman, you can't do this. This is pagan, apostate behavior, heathen behavior. That's what he calls it. You can't worship as the heathen anymore. You are my wife. And during this time, the King of Elfland, for whom just a couple of hours have passed, has a troll, although he's referred to alternately as a troll and a gnome, and his behavior kind of more fits the gnomish style. Older fairy stories and that sort of thing have a tendency to sort of intermix their human and demi-human names. So what one storyteller might have called a dwarf, another might have referred to as a gnome. What another might have called a troll, we might consider more of a goblin, not the traditional Poul Anderson-esque troll, the 10-foot tall, rubbery skinned, huge, banana nose, black, pitiless eyes, and regeneration and all that. So he writes his second rune on a piece of paper that will make her leave the land of humans and come back to him. And the troll shows up, leaves her the parchment, and is like, I don't like this human land. I'm going back home. And she immediately locks the rune away and is like, I'm never looking at that. I know what that is. I'm not going to get suckered. I might be vexed at my husband, but I'm not going to look at that. Well, she gets so pissed off at him about the heathen behavior that she opens the chest and carries the scroll around with her for a while. And when she really gets piqued, she reads the scroll, and the wind just kind of picks her up and gently carries her back to Elfland. And I'm at the point in the story now where her husband has abandoned his duties as king of the land, and left his son, who is named Orion, in the care of some of his subjects and gone to quest for his mother. But the thing about it is the king of Elfland, part of his spell of bringing the daughter back, his rune, separated Elfland. It hid the entrance to Elfland from him. So he puts together a party of adventurers, a bard, so named, a bard, a heartbroken lover, a madman, and a hunter. And the faithless lover and one other man, I think it's the hunter, eventually, after years, give up the quest and go back to the kingdom. But having been on the quest, they are fulfilled. They feel better for having done it. So they come back to the kingdom, and currently his madman companion, the bard, and I want to say there were 6 of them total. So maybe there's one other, but they're still out there living on the land. And what's funny is well, not funny, but what's interesting is, as far away from the kingdom or as far away from his duties, I should say, not necessarily the kingdom itself, as far away from his duties as he's gotten, he has not physically gone that far from home. The first time he went to find her, he was gone for a couple of weeks, and instead of the foggy, misty forest that he passed through to find her, he found just this desolate, rocky plain that just stretched on to near infinity. And he nearly starved to death walking through that wilderness, even though he'd packed a good provender, or through that desolation, I should say, not wilderness. He packed good provender and attempted to find the way to Elfland there. And the man who made his scabbard insisted that there was nothing there. He's like, I don't know what's over there. He's like, what's to the east? He's like, why don't you ask me what's to the north? And he's like, well, I want to know what's to the east, where my bride went. And he's like, ask me what's to the south. So it's like he's actively refusing to tell him. So it hasn't been revealed yet, but I think maybe he got affected slightly by the charm of the king of Elfland moving his kingdom away. So at this point, he has his band, even though some of the company has left and returned back to the kingdom. And it's implied that most of their travel has been up and down a road that runs behind houses on the outskirts of the village. Like, it's not like they've gone thousands of miles. It's not like, the company of 9 journeying all the way to the Argonath, where they were sundered, but literally just like, yeah, he's a few hundred yards over that way. But the strangeness of the journey and his desire to see his wife again has separated. It has caused a rift between he and his kingdom. So they're now kind of viewed as these wanderers, just these strange wanderers that are occasionally seen moving up and down as he's trying to find his way back to Elfland. And so that's where I am currently in the story. It's a pretty good read so far. Some of the exciting bits about would be him fighting the trees and fighting the knights. We definitely see some things that Gary drew some inspiration from. You might say that Gary's adherence to Vancian magic was also maybe flavored by this a little bit, because the king of Elfland, he knows 3 spells that he saved for the defense of his realm. He used one of them and almost slew the husband to restore his daughter. It's gone. He wrote the second one on a parchment, so he basically made a one-use scroll. She read it and it was gone. It was over and done with. So maybe that's where Gary got, you read the scroll and the spell is gone. Or maybe Gary just thought of that on his own. It was just kind of a concurrent development. And he, he's got an intelligent weapon that it's not really gone into that much. The sword after it's made, but while it's being made, it's got a really fascinating. It's described in a very fascinating way. So, pardon me a mo. In fact, you know what? If you want to read it, I'm gonna see if I can find here. I'm gonna share the link with you guys. Now you can buy a physical copy if you're I want to. If you're the kind of person and you want a physical copy of it, I heartily recommend getting a physical copy of any book. Buy your books, folks. Don't let them just exist electronically. But there you go. It is on fatedpage.com/books 2012-0938 html.php. But check it out. That is the Ballantine Books edition from June 1969, and it covers all of the chapters. And let me see. Alveric is the hero's name. I want to see, because I want to describe this sword to you guys. So first of all, he makes the sword from lightning bolts. He goes to a witch, and she has him find thunderbolts. Thunderbolts struck the hill above her house, and she made her garden there. And so she tells him, "Go dig up the thunderbolts that are underneath my cabbages and bring them to me." And that's a very classic fairy story thing. It's like, I have a little job for you. Go get my cabbages, and underneath them you'll find these thunderbolts. And Dunzani goes into the creation of the magic item, and it's great. Just how he describes this. And this is so good. I'm going to try and do this justice. I'm read a little bit here. On the grass beside her, he laid those strangers to earth. From wonderful spaces they came to her magical garden, shaken by thunder from the paths that we cannot tread. And though not in themselves containing magic, were well adapted to carry what magic her runes could give. She laid the thigh bone of a materialist down, and turned to those stormy wanderers. She arranged them in one straight row by the side of her fire, and over them she toppled the burning logs and embers, prodding them down with the ebon stick that is the scepter of witches, until she had deeply covered those 17 cousins of earth that were visited us from their ethereal home. She stepped back then from her fire and stretched out her hands, and suddenly blasted it with a frightful rune. The flames leapt up in amazement. And what had been but a lonely fire in the night, with no more mystery than pertains to all such fires, flared suddenly into a thing that wanderers feared. As the green flames, stung by her runes, leaped up, and the heart of her fire grew intenser, she stepped backwards further and further, and merely uttered her runes a little louder the further she got from the fire. She bade Alveric pile on logs, dark logs of oak that lay there cumbering the heath, and at once, as he dropped them on, the heat licked them up, and the witch went on pronouncing her louder runes, and the flames danced wild and green. And down in the embers the 17, whose paths had once crossed earths whence they wandered free, knew a heat again as great as they had known, even on that desperate ride which had brought them here. And when Elveric could no longer come near the fire, and the witch was some yards from it shouting her runes, the magic flames burned all the ashes away, and that portent that flared on the hill suddenly ceased, leaving only a circle that sullenly glowed on the ground, like the evil pool that glares where the thermite has burst. And flat in the glow, all liquid still, lay the sword. The witch approached it and pared its edges with the sword that she drew from her thigh. Then she sat down beside it on the earth and sang to it while it cooled. Not like the runes that enraged the flames was the song she sang to the sword. She whose curses had blasted the fire till it shriveled in big logs of oaks crooned now a melody like a wind in summer blowing from wild wood gardens that no man tended, down valleys loved once by children, now lost to them but for dreams, a song of such memories as lurk and hide along the edges of oblivion, now flashing from beautiful years of glimpse some golden moment, now passing swiftly out of remembrance again to go back to the shades of oblivion, and leaving on the mind those faintest traces of little shining feet when dimly perceived by us are called regrets. She sang of old summer noons in the tune of harebells. She sang that on high dark heath, a song that seemed to fill mornings and evenings, preserved with all the dews by her magical craft from days that had been lost, that Alveric wondered of each small wandering wing that her fire had lured from the dusk, if this were the ghost of some day lost to man, called up by the force of her song from times that were fairer. And all the while the unearthly metal grew harder. The white liquid stiffened and turned red. The glow of the red dwindled, and as it cooled and narrowed, little particles came together, little crevices closed, and as they closed they seized the air about them, and with the air they caught the witch's rune and gripped it and held it forever, and so it became a magical sword. And little magic there is in English woods, from time of anemones to the falling of leaves, that was not in that sword. And little magic there is in southern downs, that only sheep roam over and quiet shepherds, that the sword had not too. And there was a scent of thyme in it, and sight of lilac, and the chorus of birds that sings before dawn in April, and the deep proud splendor of rhododendrons, and the litheness and laughter of streams, and miles of May. And by the time the sword was black, it was all enchanted with magic. Nobody can tell you about that sword that there is... Nobody can tell you about that sword all that there is to be told of it, for those that know of the paths of space on which its metals once floated, till Earth caught them one by one as she sailed past on her orbit, have little time to waste on such things as magic, and so cannot tell you how the sword was made. And those who know whence poetry is, and the need that man has for song, or know any one of the 50 branches of magic, have little time to waste on such things as science, and so cannot tell you whence its ingredients came. Enough that it was once beyond our earth, and was now here amongst our mundane stones, that it was once but as those stones, and now had something in it, such as soft music. Let those that can define it. So, yeah, that's the discussion of the crafting of the magic sword, and it is that's just how Dunzani's prose flows, and I heartily recommend you follow that link and absolutely check it out, give it a read. It's fantastic stuff. But yeah, so if you're looking for a damn fine fantasy book and something that absolutely uh, influenced and shaped D&D, I think, in a lot of ways, do check out King of Belfland's Daughter. I have thoroughly enjoyed every minute of it. And I think I mentioned to you guys the other thing I'm reading is Neuromancer, which is 180 degrees and 10,000 miles away from King of Elfland's Daughter. It is a quest. It is a story journey of the character Henry Dorset Case, but we'll talk about cyberpunk some other time, I think. And we can kind of bring that up. So I definitely give it a thumbs up, though. That the King of Elfland's Daughter, and you should absolutely check that out. I think I've already said tomorrow I'll be doing some more Paint Lab, going over the various ins and outs of painting some more. If that's what you guys want to see. If you don't want to see it, then by all means just message me. Just put a comment in and say do something else. And then Friday we'll talk initiative. And have a lot of fun talking not initiative, I'm sorry. Alignment. We'll talk about alignment. I am not prepared to talk about initiative. Nobody does initiative right, not even the people who wrote Addict. If you're not sure what Addict is, there's a group of fans of AD&D that got together to write the ultimate guide to how an AD&D combat round should be resolved by the book. And so they put this thing, and Addict is an acronym because everybody wants to do acronyms. It's, ADD is AD&D, Initiative, Combat, Turn, or something like that. And they insist that it is exactly the right and proper way and the only way to do combat by the book. I think it's a bunch of horse shit myself. Here's the problem with Addict, guys. If you know what Addict is, or if you don't know what Addict is and you go look for it, it's bullshit, and I can save you a lot of headaches. If Gary had written a combat round procedure down that said things happen in this order, do them like that, it would have been so much better than the implications and so on and etc. But you can read the rules and figure out that like psionic combat happens before anything else. Keep getting messages. Psionic combat happens before anything else. Then unarmed combat. Although I question the unarmedness of smashing someone in the face with a fist covered with a plate mail gauntlet. Then charges, then initiative, then missile fire, and spells in the order of how many segments they take to cast, and so on and etc. And then you have trading melee blows back and forth. I have a pretty good system of how it works. The overwrought, overly complicated mess that is Addict is just it's just a giant mess. Hey Rich Denver, hello, how are you? I just saw all these things pop up. I was in another window. So to address this, Paul asks, I forget, does AD&D use weapon speed? Yes, it does. And where weapon speed comes into play is it resolves initiative ties. If you're attacked by a group of kobolds and they all have daggers and your party all has big heavy pole arms and it's an initiative tie, the kobolds are going to go first. Just tap, 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 tap. Where it also matters is in spell casting. If you have a weapon, which is weapon speed 4, I don't have my player's handbook handy. I'm not sure what might be weapon speed 4. And your magic user has been attacked by that person, and he is casting a spell that is only 3 segments long, or only has a casting time of 3 segments, then his spell will go before the weapon lands, potentially. And I'll get to that in a minute. If his spell takes commensurately longer, he may get hit and his spell ruined before he can cast it. Hello, Cerulean. Good to see you. So first edition also had a weapon speed. But here's the thing. I and most other DMs determine when you start counting down for a spell. Now, Gary was very contradictory, and that's the problem with Addict. Gary never wrote down in the rules in an official sense a lot of things, like when exactly spell casting begins. Sometimes he would say spell casting begins when the spellcaster, you declare, I'm going to cast initiative, or I'm going to cast sleep. It's a 1 segment spell. All right, let's roll initiative. Bad guys rolled a 6, good guys rolled a 1. And there's 2 schools of thought. And Gary played it and explained it both ways. The first way is that, okay, when it's our party's initiative, then I can cast my sleep spell. Other times, it's interpreted as, my spell doesn't go until the opponent's initiative plus the length of the spell. So the bad guys roll a 6, the good guys roll a 1. Now sleep's not a 4-segment spell, but let's say he's casting a 4-segment spell. It's not going to go till the end of the round. And indeed, if it's a spell like Cure Light Wounds, which takes a full 10 segments to cast, it might not be until the middle of the next round. So a player might die before Cure Light Wounds can get cast on them, assuming it's not disrupted by the spellcaster being hit. But the thing about it is Gary was never consistent with his explanation of when spellcasting begins. Does it begin on opponent's initiative, or does it begin at the start of the round and goes when the party finally gets to go? So there's lots of little things like that that make Addict not work. Not the rules, rather Gary's kind of inconsistent explanation and application of them. I mean, when I played D&D with Gary, we did individual initiative on D10s, and that was the segment you acted on, because a combat round is 10 segments long. You know? that's the way we did it. If you rolled a 9, you weren't acting till segment 9. So it would be rolling lower was a good thing. Now, granted, that was Castles and Crusades. I haven't played Castles and Crusades in 15 years or more, so it may have been changed since then. So that's where I'm remembering. Hadn't seen it since I tried Hackmaster. Hackmaster 5e rules. Hackmaster is not my cup of tea. The Kenzer and Co. were kind enough to send me the Hackmaster DMG. I looked at it, I appreciated what they did, and I know if they hadn't been constrained by Wizards of the Coast insisting that they make it a parody, not a house ruled and revamped AD&D, it might have not been so fucking Mad Magazine tongue-in-cheek. But it just wasn't to my taste. So yeah, Hackmaster not my cuppa, really. And I know that a lot of and you may say, okay, well, you can ignore the humor and play it, but even Kenzer and Co., there was a rules error in Hackmaster where it made it more advantageous to, if you were firing missiles into melee, it made it more advantageous to target your allies, because you actually had a slightly better chance of hitting foes. And people who were big fans of Hackmaster pointed this out to them and said, did you flip these percentages? And Kenzer and Co.'s response was, no, just use it like that. Just use it as written. We're not going to change it. That's the way the rule is. If you're firing into melee, target your friends, not your foes. So, yeah. So that stuff like that, and the forced and often unfunny humor kind of made me not a fan of Hackmaster. But if it's your cup of tea, if that's your jam, I appreciate that it was that Kenzer and Co. told Wizards of the Coast, this is what we want as part of our settlement for you guys reprinting Knights of the Dinner Table without our permission in the Dragon Magazine Archive CD set. And no, we're not going to do it as a D20 system. We're not going to do it as a open gaming license game. Now, with that said, I have heard that some of the folks from Kenzer and Co. were spreading untruths. I'm not going to call them liars. They were spreading untruths about Osric when Osric came out, that it was illegal, that if you used Osric, you'd get sued out of existence by Wizards of the Coast. And obviously that's not true. I mean, Osric is fine. Rich says, I like competing dice rolls to resolve combat attacks, D20 plus attacks bonus versus D20 plus defense. It keeps players more engaged. I mean, if that's your jam, again, that's fine. I've got a perfectly workable combat system right in front of me, and I don't need the 13-page long addict just to resolve when stuff happens in a combat round. I mean, if I didn't know better, I would say that Daniel Prada and everyone else who contributed to Addict did that to tear down AD&D's reputation and show that AD&D was a horribly complex kludgy game. I can tell you guys how I resolve a combat round if you're interested. And it's pretty damn simple. And I don't care if it's not by Daniel Prada's book. Because the fact that you went to Gary, who notoriously changed his points of view. First of all, by the mid 2000s, mid early 2000s, Gary was straight up sick of answering questions about D&D. He would talk about Greyhawk, but when it came to rules, he'd say, that's up to you and your DM. So having all this stuff explained out to him, if he said, yeah, sure, that's fine, it was probably in that context of, yeah, sure, fine, whatever. But you know, I played AD&D just fine for years before that. And in fact, I will tell you guys how a combat round works in my game. First, I get declarations from everybody. I don't use psionics except for a set number of monsters that my players, luckily for them, have never encountered. However, anybody that wants to engage in fisticuffs, that's resolved first. Charges are resolved before initiative. I mean, it says so right in the Dungeon Master's Guide. Charges are resolved before initiative. Initiative is rolled, and the winning side of initiative fires their first volley of missiles. Then there's the melee exchange. The losing side fires their first volley of missiles. The winning side fires their second volley of missiles, if necessary. And then the losing side fires their second volley of missiles, if necessary. Now, during that progression is when spells cast by either side go on spell casting time plus opponent's initiative. And that's it. Easy peasy. I don't know why you would ever want to add layers of complexity to that. If there's an initiative tie, higher weapon speed goes first. That's it. Or the faster weapon goes first, I should say. Because, a weapon with a speed of 1 is faster than a weapon with a speed of 10. That's literally it. And as far as like actual combat resolution, there's the tables. One of my players asked me offline whether or not I used weapons versus armor type, and I don't. Even Gary doesn't use them, and recommends and recommended when people would ask him about it, like, I don't use them, and you shouldn't either. But yeah, weapons versus armor type I don't use. It's just a case of too much detail and too much granularity. It's like, why does an ox tongue have a bonus of like +1 across these types of armors, but a glaive hook, which is barely any different if you look at them in a medieval weaponry book, it's like, one has a tip that's like curved a little to the left and the other has a tip that's curved a little to the right, and it gets these various bonuses. I just think Gary was a little caught up in chainmail thinking and didn't realize what a crashing bore it would be. But Cerulean, that's basically it. That's how I resolve combat. Any psionics, melee combat, charges, initiative, winner's missile fire, winner's first missile fire, winner's melee, loser's first missile fire, loser's melee, winner's second missile fire, loser's second missile fire, and somewhere in there, depending on when the segments go, the spells are shot. It's that simple. I just think it's super easy. So, hang on 1 second, guys. Sorry, my old buddy Spam Risk just called me. My apologies, everyone. But, yeah, I mean, if you have any other questions, just let me know. I mean, you know, I conclude... If I was pressed and someone said, like, okay, well, what about siege engines? What about catapults and so on? I would say that given their relatively slow rate of fire, that if they're loaded and fired at characters, they're basically spotted and fired, and the character, you know, if it's a boulder, you know, if it's a catapult, or even necessarily a scorpion or ballista, I would say, you know, if the character, well, scorpion or ballista can really be aimed a little bit better than a cat. So I would say, yeah, a boulder, if a character moves more than the standard 10-foot square of melee, it's probably just going to miss them, and it's not going to land till the end of the round if it's arcing over a castle wall. Which is not to imply that it takes a full minute to fly through the air, but scorpion or ballista can be aimed, and I would just treat them as normal missile fire. Combat should... Paul says, combat should be engaging and quick. If you ever have a round of combat where nothing happens, it's time to fix / house rule. Well, yeah, I mean, if there's a round of combat where nothing happens, then that's not a round of combat. that's just a round. No, I mean, you can have a round where, you know, monsters have a set movement rate and characters have a set movement rate. The characters might move 90 feet forward to confront a monster that can only move it, say, you know, 30 feet around, and they're 140 feet apart. So the monster moves its 30 feet, the characters move their 90 feet, and now they're 10 feet apart. They still can't melee, but, you know, how do I manage player turn lengths? If by turn you mean each player's actions, just that it encompasses the whole round, but it's abstracted. I mean, you know, I'm not saying, okay, well, let's see, you know, each segment is 6 seconds long. You can do this, this, and this in a segment, and so on. If you mean turn in the sense of the unit of time that is 10 minutes long in D&D, generally, if we're at the point where we're counting turns and not rounds, or segments, then it's out of combat and the party is moving as a whole, unless a character basically detaches himself from the party and says, look, you guys go do what you're going to do. I'm going to search this 20 by 20 room for secret doors. Searching any space to have any chance of success when searching for a secret door or concealed door or what have you. I mean, actively searching or searching for traps without the advent of a or the advantage of a find trap spell. Um, the process will take no less than a turn. Whether it's one character searching, whether it's 20 characters searching, one turn minimum. I mean, with one character searching, if they're actually really, truly, honestly searching for a secret door or a concealed door or for traps, they're going to be taking their time. And at minimum, they're going to have a set number of methods that they're going to go through to search. They're going to sprinkle a little sand along that funny looking joint. They might take it and pour some water along it to see if it sinks, if water sinks down in it. Hold a feather up to that crack to see if air blows through it. See if they can get their fingernails and pull something out. All those and more. And that's going to take time. That's going to take a long time. If 20 characters are trying to search in a 10 by 10 niche, it's going to be people bumping into each other, tripping over each other, on and on and on and on. And so even though you now have 40, well, probably 40 eyes looking for something, there's chatter, it's hot, there's people stumbling over each other. So if that's what you mean by turns, that's that. If by turn you mean combat round, like I said, I tend to adhere to the idea of a player being able to move 10 or 15 feet and strike a blow or a series of blows in a single combat round. No, you can't cross a 200-foot space and then engage in melee at the end of that. You can as a charge, where you get bonuses to defense and penalties, or bonuses to offense and penalties to defense. But in the turn, the player can move about 10, 15 feet, strike blows. I've had some players say, like, they're locked in combat. This particularly happens with creatures that are particularly vulnerable to fire. Trolls. We had a situation this past week with trolls, where players were saying, "Okay, well, there's a troll in front of me. I'm gonna splash it with. I'm gonna fling oil." So here's the thing: you've got a 9-foot tall rubbery green murder machine that wants to peel and eat you. It basically wants to shuck you, like just dig its thumbs down in the top of your head and yank to get at the greasy red meat underneath. And you're gonna stop, turn to him, turn your shoulder to him, and start looking through your ditty bag to get a flask of oil out. You have no defense. You are effectively, I don't care if you've got magical, vorpal, ethereal plate mail, you are doing nothing to stop yourself from being harmed. You're looking in your waist bag for a flask of oil. Congratulations. You played yourself. But no, so sometimes players ask to do that. Like, oh, I'm in combat, I'm going to get a flask of oil out and throw it at my feet. Nope. Let's see. Paul says, I should have clarified, you should get rid of everybody, miss their rolls on to the next round. sometimes you just have swingy stuff, you know. And here's the thing, and Kyle and I have talked about this before. Missing rolls in AD, successfully hitting an AD&D with, let's say you got a two-handed sword and you hit. Was it one mighty blow that you just like reared back, just a roundhouse chop with your two-handed sword that shears through armor and bone and sinew and inflicts maximum damage? Remember, the combat round is a minute long. You know, that could be a series of thrusts, a couple of feints. You know, you bash them in the head with the hilt. That could be a series. You know, that 12 points of damage you did could be 12 individual blows. Likewise, missing could necessarily be, you know, maybe every time, you know, you had your long sword and you bam, 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 and you hit the orc chieftain and you hit him 5 times in the space of the round. But every time he brought his shield up or he brought his sword up and parried it and parried it. AD&D is just very, very abstract that way. So a round of missed blows does not necessarily mean that everybody just swung at each other. You know, I think about Darth Vader fighting Obi-Wan on the Death Star. In D&D terms, that was a fight that lasted 5 combat rounds and only 1 hit took place. But watching it on the screen, whether you've seen that revamp, that beautiful reimagining that someone did with stuntmen and CGI match moving of Alec Guinness's face on a stuntman's face, and they made it look a lot more exciting and actiony. But would you say that no blows were struck during that combat and that it was not exciting? I wouldn't. Escalation die in 13. Its age makes it resolve combat despite bad dice. Horses for courses, my friend. Cerulean, did I answer your question about how I manage player turns? But if I didn't, please let me know. If I danced completely around what you were actually asking. There's a 4th ed Hackmaster was basically Night of the Dinner Tables and a parody game. 5e, as serious as it gets, is a game of hard choices. If you have a 5th ed HMDMG, those are rare and hardback. I do not. I have a friend gave me as a birthday present one year, a very dear friend of mine, Rusty Schaefer, gave me Hackmaster Basic, which I may look at one day. I don't know. I mean, I think there's a lot to be said for Hackmaster as a game, but you know, I don't know that it's necessarily old school. I mean, if I hadn't sold the 2 or 3 Hackmaster Game Master guides that I had lying around, and I think there was a player's handbook amongst them, I might do a cross compare, but 4th ed is getting harder and harder to get, so it just, you know. And I've voiced my opinion about it plenty of times. And I'm still unhappy with what the creators of Hackmaster had to say about Osric. Mist rolls are very annoying. I'd be happy if those were to go. See, to me, that's skating dangerously close to damaging even when you miss. And I really don't like that. Sometimes the outcome of the dice is not what you want it to be. That's why we use dice and don't just say, well, I hit. You know. I don't want to get my angry old man hat on, so I'm gonna stay away from discussing that any further. Uh, but anyway, sorry, just kind of scrolling around here a little bit. So that's basically, I mean, that's my view of the D&D combat round. The only time that D&D gets weird, because again, I think of the AD&D combat round as an abstraction of, you know, feints, thrusts. Maybe the 1 point of damage you took had nothing to do with your opponent actually striking you, and it had everything to do with you overextending and pulling a hamstring, and now you're kind of limping and hobbling, and you know, that's like leaving you in agony, because, or you know, you've got a big stitch in your side or something like that. It's not actual damage that your opponent did. But the only time that breaks down is with arrows, because you know, you roll for damage. It's like you fired one arrow and you roll and you hit, you roll a d6 to, okay, a 6. Well, you didn't fire 6 arrows, you only fired 1. So arrows are where the abstraction has to become a lot more concrete. Cerulean says, well, I meant to ask about players taking overly long on their turns. To be honest, I had no idea that turns and rounds were different. Okay, so in AD&D, and time. Okay, so timekeeping is important in AD&D when you're talking about turns and longer for exploration purposes. In combat, it goes segment, which is 6 seconds. There are 10 segments in a combat round, which is 1 minute long. A turn is 10 minutes or 10 it's 10 minutes or 10 rounds long. So you can have combat that lasts multiple turns. As far as players taking overly long on their turns, I've literally just told players, you know, this comes up during combat kind of frequently, is players will say, especially spellcasters, oh god, okay, what am I, you know, it's declaration, what do I, I'm looking at my spells here, let me, well, I could cast, but and I will usually tell those players, I'll come back to you. Now, my players know, because I've done this and I've explained this to them, when I come back to them the second time, when I've gone down through, let's say the magic user is the third person on the list, and I go back down through the list, after everyone has said, okay, I'm gonna, you know, set my spear against the charge, I'm gonna knock an arrow, you know, getting ready to hurl a flask of oil, I'm drinking a potion of heroism, etc., etc., etc. When those players who have been indecisive, I come back around to them, if they're still being indecisive, I'll say, then you're not going to act this round. If you can't tell me, then you're not acting this round. And I'm not a dick about it, like, you know, you're screwing up the game. I'll just tell them, okay, you're going to lose your action this round. That usually prompts them to do something. They usually say, oh, I'll throw darts, or even, okay, well, I'll, I'm a magic user, or I'm a thief with a short bow, so I'll keep an eye on the back of the party and make sure we don't get ambushed this round. That's fine. But yeah, I'll give them a go through. But they know, like, let's say I got 10 players in my 11 players in my Monday night game. Okay, so if player number 2, they can't quite make up their minds about what they're going to do, and I say, okay, I'll come back to you. When I'm going through everyone else, sometimes somebody's like, melee, and gotcha, and we move on. Then somebody might say, okay, those barrels you've got, that little scatter terrain on the tabletop, that's there, right? Yeah. Okay, so since that's about 10 feet away from me, can I move over there and kind of duck down? But sure, that might take 15, 20 seconds of explanation so the player and I understand. So the person who is hesitating, they have ample time to think about what they're going to be doing. They can even mute the conversation and really focus in on their character sheet. Now, that's for large parties. If I have 3 players and one or more of them are, let's say, somewhat unfamiliar with the rules, I mean, it's no skin off my nose if we just take our time. If a player is legitimately not familiar with the rules, despite their best attempt, and they come to the point and they ask me, I don't know what I can do, what should I do? I'll give them a little bit of extra time. But an experienced player, when we go down progressions, if they don't give me an answer 2 times I ask, they're not doing anything that round. That's how I handle that. And they know that. They know that. They know. No, I understand. Now, I mean, if you're in the front line of the party, if you're swinging sword at the monster, odds are you're going to know what to do right then. I mean, if you're like, I'm fighting a troll, it's regenerating, I'm drinking, or rather, I'm down to 10 out of 50 hit points. If this thing gets a really good round, I'm a dead man or woman. Should I drink my potion of healing? Maybe you need a minute or 2 to think about whether or not you're going to drink that potion of healing, or continue to melee, knowing that digging around for the potion of healing is going to make you a lot more vulnerable. And the potion has an activation time. It's 1d4 plus 6, I think, rounds or segments rather, before that potion kicks in. It's not like you just belt back a potion of healing and then bam, 2d8 plus 2 right there immediately. You may belt back that potion because like crap, I'm down to 2 hit points. I got to try and at least get 10 back. You drink it, and rock crushes paper. I know paper wraps rock. You know what I'm saying. And in that case, the potion might save you from dying, depending on how much damage came down on you. But it still didn't necessarily. Well, it didn't stop the damage from coming in. So it all comes down to how the player is actually managing their time, how well they do or do not know the rules. Just a lot of different factors. A lot of different factors. So let me ask you guys this, and I'm not sure how many people came over, have been here from the beginning, or whether you guys just kind of showed up all at once when I looked up and I had like Paul, Passerby, Rich Denver, and Cerulean all saying hello at the same time. Let me ask you guys, are y'all cool with Paint Stream tomorrow, or do you want me to do something else? Because I'll paint on camera. You know I will. So if you want to see something else, just say nah. Rather watch you do something else, man. You know, hear you talk about something else. There's so many stuff. Like, I've gotten into deep dives on rules and that sort of thing. Like, when I started the channel and I was just streaming over on Facebook, which didn't work tonight. My apologies to everyone on Facebook who sees this later and wonders why I wasn't also streaming on Facebook. There were so many products that I reviewed and I just kind of gave a glossing over of, but I didn't really dig too much into. And I kind of started the deep dives a little bit with playing a session, a solo session of Space Hulk, which I really enjoyed, and then going into the hows and whys of Henchmen and Hirelings, and then into the rewarding role-playing mechanics that are built into AD&D that lots of people, Ryan Dancy in particular among them, claim didn't exist in D&D, despite the fact that they're right there and they do exist. So there's a lot of stuff that I've done reviews of. Like, I'm looking at a bookshelf across the room, and chainmail is facing me. Those of you who maybe have played original Dungeons and Dragons and seen where it refers to chainmail might be a little unfamiliar with how chainmail was used as the combat system for D&D, because it is the default combat system for original Dungeons and Dragons. The consult the armor class and go across the matrix roll d20 thing is a variant combat system which can be used if you don't want to use just 2d6. And of course, that became the standard for almost 30 years. And then, you know, wizards flounced into the room and said, we're doing it all by formula now. Because, you know, looking at a table is so awful and so horrible. Speaking of tables, that brings me to something else. Since we're talking about combat and you guys have got me on a roll now, I want to talk a little bit about AD&D tables, particularly repeating 20s. If you look in the Dungeon Master's Guide, I have one viewer right now. All right, viewer. If you look in the Dungeon Master's Guide, you might notice that there are certain monsters and characters of limited enough ability that them fighting against certain armor classes requires a 20 to hit. But then you might notice, okay, well, a 0 level fighting man to hit armor class 0 requires a 20. Just like they have to roll a 20. Well, let's say that 0 level fighting man has somehow acquired a +4 weapon. He need only roll a 16 to hit that armor class 0. But you might notice, well, wait a second. There's a 20 after that, too. So that means he has a +4 weapon. If I roll a 16, he hits. not so. Repeating 20s, basically every 20 after the first, indicates that a natural 20, regardless of any other bonuses, regardless of any other magical bonuses, has to be rolled to hit. You might have that +4 weapon and you roll a 19 to hit armor class -1. That 19 is not going to hit, even though you have a +4 weapon. You must roll a minimum of 20. All other bonuses will apply to damage, but you still have to roll a nat 20. Now you might say, well, there's a 20 after that, and there's a 20 after that, and there's a 20 after that. Again, it all indicates you have to roll a minimum of 20. Now, you get low enough armor classes, you start to get into -7, -8, -9, -10, which are just, fortunately for player characters, and for dungeon masters, such incredibly rare things that these are almost edge cases. I saw that, Cerulean. You don't have to retract that. I asked for opinions. But if you if you look at those cases where a 21 or a 22, well, you can't roll a 21 or a 22 on a 20-sided die. Then natural bonuses also have to kick in. And by natural bonuses, I mean you have to have extraordinary strength, or you have to be striking the target unawares from the rear or from whatever aspect, and get natural combat bonuses rolled in. So, a lot of people, and the reason I'm bringing this up is, so, and it's become a meme where people go on about Thaco. It's AD&D, they speak Thaco there, and so on and etc. The 2-hit armor class 0 is a baseline, but it is not the be-all end-all. And in first edition AD&D, it only applies to monsters. Using it as a baseline for a character does not necessarily work. It breaks down with repeating 20s. So just if you're going to play AD&D and you look down and you're like, oh, okay, so you just need 20s to hit anything. Everything past the first one is indicative of a natural 20, regardless of any other bonuses. You got a +5 Vorpal sword in the hands of someone who needs a natural 20 to hit a given armor class. They can roll 20 19s in a row, and that means 20 times they've missed. And it represents that what they're attacking is just that extraordinary versus their skills. Now, the 21st time, if they roll that natural 20, oh yeah, bring the thunder. They just landed a telling blow. But that's why Thaco, when people say, first edition AD&D, you guys speak Thaco. No. It's only for monsters, and it's only a referential baseline. I could really get my Grandpa Simpson pants on and go on a rant about my feelings on inverted armor classes, but I will spare you the rant and expend the knowledge. I will tell you the knowledge. And I've explained this before, but there was a TSR game, I think it was called Ironclads, that, as the name implies, or it may have been Avalon Hill, but I think it was TSR, but it was about ironclad riverboat combat during the Civil War. And different types of ironclad ships, you know, the South at that time was fairly metal poor. The Northeast was metal rich. So they would have different grades of armor, different classes. So like if somebody says something, oh, this is first class, you know, first class accommodations, first class hotel room, first class restaurant, you know, first class anything, that's better than second class or third class or fourth class or fifth class, and so on and so on and so on down the line. So to me, to my ears, when someone says, well, the 10th is better than the first when it comes to armor, that doesn't make any sense to me. I mean, do you want to be the guy that came in 10th or the guy that came in first in a race? That is why armor classes are upside down. And it became the inclusion of going past first or second class armor to 0th class, to negative first class, to negative second class, with magical armors and with extraordinary dexterities that gave us armor class -1, -0, and -1, and -2, and -3, and on down the line. So there's a medium depth dive into AD&D for you. And look, if your first D&D was 3rd edition or later, and you're used to, like, armor class 20 is mighty, why would you ever want to be armor class 1? That's fine. Then obviously ascending armor classes make sense to you. I dealt with descending armor classes and know it's not easier to do ascending armor classes. You add on one, you subtract on the other, and you deal with some negative integers. And furthermore, you look at a table. You don't worry. It's like, well, but then you have to add negative integers. No. If they just kept the combat tables, you wouldn't have had to worry about negative armor classes. It was when everybody insisted, and this just struck me so strange, that, like, oh, well, using the formula, or, you know, using ascending armor classes makes so much more sense than THAC0. Maybe it does make more sense than THAC0, but nobody I knew ever used THAC0, except as that baseline referential point. So, you know, so make of that what you will. So guys, I've had a lot of fun this evening. I've got some pasta fagioli in the fridge that's calling me, that I'm going to go and microwave and enjoy. Might be on Ishii's stream tonight. I think that's going to happen. Kyle will not be there, unfortunately. It breaks my heart. He's got the kids at home, and he's got to tend to the little ones, so he can't sit here and screw around on the internet for an hour. But I will read your last messages in parting here before I go. Paul says, I don't paint that much myself. I noticed that I was the lone man last paint stream. If people show up for deep dives, go for it. I like it when people show up to talk about esoteric systems. Well, thank you for being there, at least. I just do it to find a way to fill time when I'm bereft of ideas. But I will paint tomorrow. I've already stated that tomorrow will be a paint stream, so I will be painting tomorrow. But perhaps we'll pare it back down to a single paint stream in future endeavors. But we shall see. We shall see. So yes, I believe I have been invited over to Ishii's live stream tonight. I'm going to try. I'm going to like see if I can get set up early and have my camera in effect on Ishii's stream tonight. I hope it works. Knock on wood. It won't be this camera. It'll be my webcam, which I've got clipped to my shelf over yonder. So we'll see if it works. So, yeah, let's just go ahead and wrap it up there. Guys, thank you all for coming out. If you came here to watch this video because the Facebook stream wasn't working, it's Facebook's fault. Okay? Sorry, I'm not sorry I didn't just cancel the whole stream and I only did it on YouTube. But I'm sorry if you missed it. Again, your thoughts and prayers, please, for Tracy Lesh. He's unwell. And I will see you guys all tomorrow afternoon for a paint stream. And then Friday, we're going to do a deep dive because we're going to go into alignment. And I promise you, we're not going to be talking about Hitler, Charlie Manson, or Jesus. So keep that in mind. Peace to you all. Have an absolutely wonderful evening. Just a Passerby is prepping for Cyberpunk Red, the follow-up to Cyberpunk 2020. They put in tables. Good. Mike Pondsmith is a good man. So I will leave you with that, and I will see you all later. I love you all. Take care.